Hey, Life Group leaders. We hope you guys are having a great week so far. Hope this finds you well and healthy and not too overly busy. We're glad you have a few minutes here to sit down just for a brief preview of the lesson for this week. So we're just going to jump right into it. And we're going to let's read through the passage together. It's always good when you start getting ready for a lesson. And we're just going to read through it there. Philippians 4:10 through 20. I rejoiced in the Lord greatly because once again you renewed your care for me. You were, in fact, concerned about me, but lacked the opportunity to show it. I don't say this out of need, for I have learned to be content in whatever circumstances I find myself. I know how to make do with little, and I know how to make do with a lot. In any and all circumstances, I have learned the secret of being content, whether well-fed or hungry, whether in abundance or in need. I am able to do all things through him who strengthens me. Still, you did well by partnering with me in my hardship, and you Philippians know that in the early days of the gospel, when I left Macedonia, no church shared with me in the matter of giving and receiving except for you alone. For even in Thessalonica, you sent gifts for my needs several times. Not that I seek the gift, but I seek the profit that is increasing to your account. But I have received everything in full, and I have an abundance. I am fully supplied, having received from Epaphroditus what you provided, a fragrant offering, an acceptable sacrifice, pleasing to God. And my God will supply all your needs according to his riches in glory in Christ Jesus. Now to our God and Father be glory forever and ever. Amen. So if you were with us last week, Ken did a great job explaining on the passage about unity. And so, as always, I think the book does an excellent job with these lessons. So again, if you're struggling at all, you literally cannot go wrong by just going through the lesson yourself as though you were reading it as one of your the people in your class, in your life group, and then going back to the back of the book for the leader helps there, the extra content, the ideas, the questions, things like that, examples, and just walking straight through this. So what I said, I'm going to do what I always do is just kind of sort of take the chunk of the passage that really stands out to me and speaks to me the most where I'm at in life, and just give you some extra content, extra ideas on that. Like I said, you're going to do fine if you just stay with the book. And so the big thing to take away when you do an initial read through of the lesson, these few pages here, is they do a really good job of pointing out that the previous passage that we looked at on unity that leads straight into this idea on joy, and because you can't have joy without having unity as far as in the context of the church, and so it's really important to look here and think about what is joy, and you could start there. It might be a good place to start with your class, your group this week, is to talk for a minute about what is joy. Is joy, because people often do this, and we probably need the reminder that I think, especially in America, in our context, where we typically, the kids joke about first world problems. We have plenty of first world problems that we see as problems, and most of the rest of the world, and really most of the rest of people throughout human history, would trade anything to have our problems. So, we tend to equate joy with happiness, which is a trap. That's a trap. I think it's maybe a uniquely wealthy person, rich man, rich young ruler, modern first world country person trap, because we say if we're not happy, we're not joyful, and they couldn't be more different, like the two things. Happiness is really an emotion. Happiness is a fleeting, passing state of being for a moment when something just makes you feel good. Joy is a state. It's a disposition. It's I think in some ways it's a chosen state. It's a way of being and a way of looking at life and circumstances. In fact, a good way you could even almost, if you looked at this passage, verses 10 through 13, and if that was the whole passage, I actually thought to myself, like, you could actually title the lesson not under the circumstances, but above the circumstances, because kind of the point here about joy is that joy should be able to transcend whatever your current circumstances are. Because if you take a typical life group, you're going to have some people in that group whose lives have been relatively easy. Maybe the biggest stressor they've had is buying a house or juggling some financial stuff or where to go to college. That's easy problems. You're going to have other people who have had horrific, terrible traumas happen to them in life, who have suffered, who are maybe still suffering, who have just not had an easy road. And so you're going to have people with very different experiences. And I think the trick with a passage like this, any passage in Scripture sometimes, is to take that passage and say, it applies to all people. So how do we, in a group setting, apply it to this person over here who's had a pretty cushy Nerf life, and this person over here who's had just a rough go of it, and their circumstances are very different, yet they can still both have joy. One of them may not have had as much happiness as the other, but both people can experience joy. And so I want us to just look, like I said, the rest of the passage from verses 14 through 20 on. You can easily use the book to take you through those. I want to just focus on verses 10 through 13 and just give a little bit of extra thought about that, because that's what stands out to me as I look through this lesson is the idea of contentment, joy, having lacking, having abundance, all that. So let's take that just verse by verse and jump into that for a moment and say, verse 10, but I rejoiced, and this may be a slightly different translation here, but I rejoiced in the Lord greatly that now at last your care for me has flourished again. Remember that word, that phrase, flourished again. Though you surely did care, but you lacked opportunity. The Greek word for flourished again, for that little phrase, is extremely rare, and it's found in the New Testament only in this sentence. You won't find it anywhere else in the New Testament. It's technically a botany term for a plant that appeared to have died, appeared to have completed its life cycle, but then surprisingly bloomed again the next spring. So in one highly technical word, Paul is basically saying, you Philippians, you bloomed time and again, and no one expected any more from you, but you surprised. You bloomed unexpectedly again to my great delight. And so we look at verse 11 there. It says, not that I speak in regard to need, for I have learned in whatever state that I am to be content. And so the word need there, not that I speak in regard to need, is the word that means poverty. So he's saying not that I speak in regard to poverty, because Paul didn't want them to think that he was destitute. He wasn't trying to be dramatic. He said, the word translated learned, for I have learned in whatever state I am to be content. The word translated learned means to increase your knowledge by experience. And that's interesting, right? Because there's a different word for learning something for the first time. So there's a different word that could have been used if it was like, here's the first time you're seeing this. Here's how to do it. That's not the word he used. He used the word that denotes learning something by experience. So therefore, Paul's kind of saying this skill that he's developed to be content is not just something that happens like that, super easy. I just showed you how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich one time, and now you know how to do it, right? That's something you learn the first time you see it. Paul's not saying that. Paul's saying, I've learned to be content, and the word he's using is I have learned through experience. I have, there's a great song, I can't think of what it is right now off the top of my head, but it says, I've suffered for these... I've suffered for these lessons, basically, that I've learned. Yeah, and so I think it's a country song, maybe. I'll have to look that up. Holler back if you want to know what it is. But essentially the idea here is it's the same. It's that Paul's saying is some lessons are easy. You make a sandwich one time, you know how to do it. That's not what he's talking about. He's telling them this is a hard-earned lesson. I have learned through experience. I have walked through life. I have suffered hardships. I have over and over again had experiences that have taught me how to be content. So I think that's important when I said earlier about being able to relate this to more than one group of people. Like I said, if you have a modern American first world person who's maybe had a pretty easy life, that might not strike them in a difficult way or be hard for them emotionally to relate to. Somebody who, again, we could list off a litany of circumstances that could be difficult and make for what we consider to be a hard life. That's going to mean more to them. That pointing that out, that Paul isn't just saying, "Oh, I just learned how to be content," because that person's going to scoff at that, and rightfully so, if that's what they think is being said. So it's important that we make sure to communicate that to people. That's not what Paul's saying. He's not saying, "Ho hum, sometimes life's hard, but I've learned how to be content in everything, and it's easy." Not at all what he's saying. Like, he's not trying to denote that, and that's difficult. Anytime you're moving from an ancient language to modern English, it's hard to sort of fish those things out and make sure we totally understand them. But I think that's an important salient point you can make to people in your class, especially if you have people that either have been through the ringer in their life or are going through the ringer in their life, to denote to them that hey, we should take encouragement here that Paul is pointing out that he did not learn that lesson easily. And you could go back if you want to and point through some of the things Paul's been through, some of the things he's going to go through, ultimately giving his life for the gospel. And that might help give some comfort and some hope to people who are going through really difficult times or have suffered really hard things in their life, that they too can learn from those experiences. If Paul did it, and we're going to see here through Christ's strength, if Paul did it, then they too, through Christ's strength, can learn through experience to be content. So let's look at verse 12. It says, "I know how to be abased, and I know how to abound. Everywhere and in all things I have learned both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need." And so, again, the word learned in this verse is really, really different. It's found nowhere else in the New Testament. It's kind of a pagan word that Paul sort of Christianizes, if you will. It literally means I've been initiated. I've been initiated. So let's read that word again in this verse. I know how to be abased. I know how to abound. Everywhere and in all things I have learned both to be full and to be hungry. So he's saying, a word there that sort of says, I've been initiated in. Like I said, in the pagan context, it would have been sort of like in the Greek mystery cults, would have used that word for somebody who had been initiated into the secrets, like the secrets of their little secret society. And so I think Paul uses that word, almost kind of baptizes that word as a way of saying that through his journeys, God's revealed the secret of how to handle an abundance and how to handle poverty. So he's saying a word they would have thought of as people having learned a secret. He's saying, okay, that word you've heard in that context, here I'm trying to get across to you guys that, hey, there's a secret about how to balance these things. There's a secret about how the person who has great wealth and his as a wonderful, easy, stress-free life, and the person who's suffering and has nothing and is destitute and is struggling, there's a secret about how they can both be content, can both be joyful. And that's what he's getting at here. And so he says that here's the secret. This is why I say I wanted to get to this part. Verse 13 to me is sort of the linchpin in this passage that jumps out to me, because you see it so taken out of context in so many ways in our culture. But he tells them the secret is, I can do all things through the strengthening of Christ. And I know as far in our actual translation here that we use in this book, it doesn't actually say Christ. It says through him who strengthens me. And there's so many translations we use. Some will say through him who strengthens me. Some will say through Christ who strengthens me. The more modern translations, they don't typically use the word Christ, that are based on the Alexandrian texts. The translations that rely more on the Textus Receptus are, I think they're trustworthy, and in those cases, they often translate into that verse through Christ who strengthens me, or through Christ who gives me strength, or through the strengthening of Christ. So Either way, it's pretty obvious who that verse is referring to. I like the ones that specifically say that we're getting our strength from Christ, because I think that's the point Paul's trying to get across. So kind of what he's saying in this whole section here is, I've learned from experience not to put my faith and hope in circumstances, but to be content in my relationship with Christ. I don't panic when I'm in need, and I don't gloat when things are easy. God has shared with me the secret of handling riches. I don't let them control me. I use money. I don't allow it to use me. God has shared with me the secret of handling poverty. I don't let it depress me. I just depend on the Lord to have others share with me. And I haven't starved yet. Paul hasn't starved yet. I think maybe some of us in life can attest to times where we had very little and God still provided somehow. So he says, I can do all these things because of the strength I receive from Christ. So the author of the lesson in the book is correct to sort of deflect the health and wealth, name it, claim it abuse of verse 13. Unfortunately, like I said, you've probably seen this on signs at football games, or you've heard it in pep talks about things that have nothing to do with this. And unfortunately, people kind of pulled that sentence, that verse, out of the context of chapter 4, completely out of the context of Philippians, really sometimes almost completely out of context of the Bible in general, and sort of made it into this like magical phrase that they think they can say about anything that's happening in life, and just sort of apply it, willy-nilly, if you will, to anything. And so I think we have to be really careful with that, because that's when you see things like a very, maybe even a godly person, but like I'm a big football fan, and so I'm not picking on football. I just heard from a lot of coaches and things like that in my life, where they, talking about going out and winning this game or overcoming some difficult opponent, and I can do all things through Christ who strengthens. That's not what this verse is talking about. This verse is not saying that you can do anything you want because you know Christ or have strength through Christ. If that's the case, Paul could have just freed himself from his captors whenever he wanted. He could have just flown. He could have lifted 3,000 pounds. Like, this idea, unfortunately, that we see really pervasive, a lot of times even in the church, again, amongst well-intentioned, good people, godly people even, to just take verses sometimes and just yank them out of context and say, see, it says I can do anything through Christ. Let's keep it in the context. Let's help people to remember that when they read this verse, it's saying that Paul is very specifically talking about our disposition towards the Lord, our ability to maintain joy in the face of changing circumstances, our ability to hold fast to Christ and to the comfort and the strength that he gives us, regardless of how things around us are changing, whether they're up, down, mountain, valley, high, low. That's the context of the verse here. Not if, I'm going to go get this promotion at work because I can do all things through Christ who strengthens. No, sorry, like this verse, that's not what this verse means. It's not about winning a football game. It's not about getting a raise. It's not about most anything. It's very specific. It is very specific to this context, and we need to treat it that way. We need to think of it that way, because if not, we're going to miss the point. We're going to miss the incredibly valuable lesson and sort of the secret, if you will, that Paul is trying to teach here, which is that God has imparted this incredible lesson to us if we'll learn it, if we'll remember it, if we'll internalize it, that we can do all things through Christ who gives us strength. And all things is in the context of overcoming any obstacle to having joy in the Lord. So he's saying that the thing we can overcome always is the circumstances of life, and keeping it from robbing us of our joy and our ability to hold on to the Lord. I almost picture it as, and this may be extreme for some people, but I think people, if you ask them to close their eyes, and maybe because I'm an artistic personality, but if you ask them to close their eyes and picture a circumstance that a situation that depicts holding on to joy in the midst of difficult life circumstances. Again, it might be interesting because you may get wildly different answers. People who've had a fairly easy life, it might be a picture in their mind of a fairly innocuous situation where maybe there's a little bit of a bump or a hardship, or I held on to joy in Christ at that time when I lost my job. And to them, and that can be an incredibly stressful situation, and to them it probably was. But the person who's sitting across from them in your room might picture in their head somebody holding on to a post as a tornado whirls around them, and they're thinking, I held fast to Christ throughout the abuse I suffered. I held fast to Christ throughout the loss of my loved ones or my children or everything I owned, or the loss of my health from cancer, from a stroke, from any number of maladies. Again, so the idea of holding on to this joy is going to be very different for different people depending on what they've gone through in life. And we just know life's not fair like that. Some people, it's going to be a little bit more of a cakewalk than others, and some people, it's going to be a hard row to hoe from birth to death. And we don't know why that is. We just got through Ecclesiastes and Job and all that. We already learned the lesson that we don't know. Like, we're not God. We don't know why things happen the way they do. He's in charge of that. And it's our job and our gift to be taught how to have joy throughout all those circumstances. So again, Paul's not saying here you can read this verse and then be a superhero and then go jump off a building. Yeah, that's basically what we're getting at. But again, the idea, I'm going to wrap that up and just kind of leave y'all with all that, is that the idea is that not under the circumstances, that's not what determines our joy, but being above the circumstances is what determines our joy. That's, if there's a takeaway sort of from that part of the passage, that's what I would say. I'd be very straightforward in reflecting the attitude of Paul in this passage that, it's going to be difficult for some to learn this lesson and very, very difficult for others. Some people are just naturally more positive. I laughed. I thought of, you remember Houston Nutt? He was the coach of the Razorbacks, and Houston Nutt was just positive. And I laughed because there was somebody asked him sometime in an interview something, and he just said, I receive only the positive. All negativity is rejected by my force field. Somebody like that's not going to have a real hard time probably learning this lesson if they haven't already. Paul's kind of maybe more in that vein, that he's already learned it and he is saying it with vigor. Other people are going to be at different stages in life's journey and where they're learning this. And just even their temperament and personality is going to affect how easy or hard it is for them to learn that ability to be content and joyful in any circumstance, regardless of whether they have abundance or if they are in need. So that's just some thoughts there. Like I said, the rest of the passage, you can easily get everything else from the context of the lesson, or going to the back for the helps. We hope you guys have a great week and a good life group together and a good discussion, and we'll see you guys next week.